Jessica left me when I had nothing, convinced I was a failure. She ran to a man with money, believing she was upgrading. She thought I'd fade into nothing. Instead, I built everything. This is the story of how I lost, rebuilt, and won without her. I pressed the button, watching as the 3D printer came to life with a low hum. A thin layer of filament began to take shape, forming the early outlines of a custom-designed gear. It was nothing special, just another small job for a local mechanic, but to me, it was another step towards something bigger. My workshop was cramped, filled with the acrid smell of melted plastic and the constant whirring of machines. Jessica never stepped foot in here unless she had a complaint, which, lately, was all the time. "You're wasting time again," she muttered from the doorway, arms crossed. "I don't know why you keep playing around with this junk. We need real money, Tom." I took a deep breath, swallowing down the frustration. "It's not junk. It's a business. A business that doesn't pay bills," she shot back. "While you sit here, making whatever those things are, I'm out there dealing with real responsibilities." I wiped my hands on my jeans and turned to face her. "Jessica, I'm building something here. It takes time, just like anything else." She scoffed, flipping her blonde hair over one shoulder. "Time? We don't have time. Rent is due. The car payment is late. And all I see is you spending hours in this garage, hoping for a miracle." Her words cut deep, but they weren't new. She never believed in this dream. Not really. In the beginning, she had nodded along when I talked about 3D printing changing the world. She had smiled when I told her about small businesses needing customized parts. I could fill that gap. But now, years later, her patience had dried up. "I have orders coming in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The mechanic downtown needs a set of custom sprockets. The bike shop wants replacement pedals for vintage models. It's growing, Jess." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Growing? Tom, you made what, $300 last week? Meanwhile, I'm working double shifts, covering everything. Maybe instead of dreaming, you should get a real job." My jaw tightened. I had a job, a real one. It just wasn't the kind she respected. "I know it's not where we want to be yet," I admitted, "but no, Tom, stop." She stepped forward, her blue eyes cold. "I can't do this forever. Watching you waste your life, hoping this business takes off when we both know it won't." I flinched, more at the finality in her tone than the words themselves. I could argue, plead, remind her that every successful company started somewhere. But I knew that look on her face. She had already made up her mind. "I have to go to work," she said, turning away. "Unlike you, I don't have time to play pretend." The door slammed behind her, and I was left standing in my workshop, the hum of the printer now sounding emptier than before. I looked down at my hands, rough, callous from work I believed in. I wasn't playing pretend. I was building something real, something that would last. She just couldn't see it. Not yet. Days turned into weeks, and the divide between Jessica and me widened like a crack in old pavement. She barely spoke to me unless it was to complain about money, and when she wasn't at work, she was out late with friends, always conveniently forgetting to invite me. At first, I tried not to overthink it. She needed space. She was stressed. Maybe she just wanted to blow off some steam. But then I started noticing the little things. Her phone never left her hand. She'd smile at messages she wouldn't share, turning away when I walked into the room. She started wearing perfume to work, something floral and expensive that I hadn't bought her. The coldness in her eyes wasn't just frustration anymore. It was something else, something distant, like she had already left, at least in her mind. "You're late again," I said one evening when she came home past midnight, the scent of liquor clinging to her clothes. She shrugged, dropping her purse on the counter. "Had a drink with Melissa after work. No big deal. You could have at least texted." She rolled her eyes. I didn't realize I had a curfew. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's not about a curfew, Jess. I just worry. That's all." She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. "Tom, I work all day. I just wanted to unwind. I don't see what the big deal is." "The big deal is that you're never here anymore," I said, my voice quieter now. "Feels like we're roommates. Or strangers." Jessica didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned against the counter, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Maybe that's because we are." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been telling myself that this was just a phase, that she was stressed, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was losing her, and I didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way she pulled away when I touched her, the way she barely looked at me anymore. Then there were the missing dollars from our joint account. At first, I thought maybe I had miscalculated. But every week, money was disappearing, small amounts then bigger ones. I asked Jessica about it once, casually, but she waved it off. Bills, Tom. Groceries. You know, the things I pay for since your hobby doesn't exactly bring in a paycheck. I let it go, but something gnawed at me. I started checking the statements more closely. Dinner charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Boutique purchases from stores I knew she hadn't visited with me. One night, when she was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the kitchen counter. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but at this point, my gut was screaming at me. The screen was locked, but the notifications told me everything I needed to know. A message from a number I didn't recognize. Can't wait to see you again. And another. Last night was amazing. My fingers curled around the phone as my heart slammed against my ribs. I put it back exactly where I found it before she could notice. I felt like an idiot. A fool. Jessica wasn't just pulling away. She was gone, and she had already found someone else to take my place. The confrontation wasn't planned. Maybe it had been building for months, or maybe I had just reached the limit of how much I could swallow. Either way, the moment Jessica walked through the door that night, I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. Who is he? I asked, my voice flat. She froze, her hand still on the doorknob. What? Don't play dumb, Jess. Who is he? The guy you've been sneaking around with? The one you spend our money on? Her eyes flashed, but she didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. Tom, save it. Just tell me the truth. She sighed, dropping her purse onto the counter. You want the truth? Fine. Yes. I've been seeing someone. And you know what? He actually has ambition. He's not sitting around wasting his life on a failed dream. Her words were meant to cut deep, and they did. But they also set me free. The night Jessica left, I didn't sleep. I sat in my workshop, staring at half-finished prototypes, trying to process the wreckage she had left behind. She didn't take much. A couple of suitcases, some clothes, her makeup. But she took our savings. Every last dollar. I found the bank statement that morning, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the transactions. One big withdrawal. Enough to cripple me. Enough to kill any chance I had at getting my business off the ground. There was no note. No epalei. Just silence. For days, I functioned on autopilot. I didn't eat. I barely drank. The 3D printer sat idle, collecting dust, while I laid in bed, unable to muster the energy to move. I thought about calling her, about demanding an explanation. But what was the point? She had made her choice, and that choice didn't include me. Bills piled up. Notices from the landlord. Disconnected utilities. My dreams, my future, everything I had worked for was slipping through my fingers. And yet, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just empty. I had hit rock bottom. But rock bottom, I would soon learn, was the perfect foundation for a comeback. I don't know what finally snapped me out of it. Maybe it was the final notice from my landlord, or the empty fridge that mocked me every time I opened it. Maybe it was just survival instinct kicking in. I powered on my laptop for the first time in weeks, my inbox overflowing with unread messages. Among the junk and overdue bill reminders, one email caught my eye. A part manufacturer I had contacted months ago was interested in a prototype I had designed. They were looking for a reliable supplier for custom 3D printed components, and they were willing to pay. At the same time, something big was happening in the world. A flu epidemic was sweeping through the country, forcing businesses to shut down. Manufacturing plants were closing, supply chains were breaking, and suddenly, small custom jobs weren't just convenient, they were essential. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a way forward. I rolled up my sleeves, dusted off my printer, and got to work. The first order came in faster than I expected. A dozen specialized machine parts, each one customized to fit a model that major suppliers no longer produced. The company paid up front, half now, half on delivery. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the lights on. I worked day and night, fine-tuning the designs, testing durability, making sure every single piece was perfect. And then, something even bigger happened. Word spread. Mechanics, manufacturers, even hospitals, people needed parts that traditional supply chains couldn't provide. And I had the tools to make them. Orders flooded in. I barely had time to sleep, running my printers nonstop, buying more equipment with every payment I received. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something real. Jessica had called my dream a waste of time. But now, my time is finally paying off. It started with small requests, custom screws, replacement gears, specialized brackets for machines that were long out of production. But every job led to another. Mechanics refer me to other mechanics. Engineers pass my name along, and soon, I was struggling to keep up with demand. I reinvested every dollar I made, buying better equipment, upgrading my printers, expanding my capabilities. I stopped thinking in terms of scraping by and started thinking about scaling up. I didn't sleep much, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I had built something that mattered, something real, and no one, not Jessica, not anyone, could take that away from me now. My inbox was a mess, requests piling up faster than I could respond. The flu epidemic had turned supply chains inside out, and businesses were scrambling for solutions. Custom parts, one-off prototypes, emergency replacements. I was suddenly in demand. A week ago, I was worried about eviction. Now, I was trying to figure out how to expand without running myself into the ground. I upgraded my workspace, turning the garage into a real production area. New printers arrived, each one faster and more precise than the last. I hired a part-time assistant, a college student studying engineering, to help with the increasing workload. Every morning, I woke up exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from building something that matters. And then, something happened that I never expected. A major industrial supplier reached out, asking for a meeting. They'd heard about my work through word of mouth, through desperate business owners who had relied on my services when their usual suppliers failed them. If this deal went through, it wouldn't just be small-time orders anymore. This could be the break that changed everything. I wasn't just scraping by anymore. I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need Jessica's approval. I never had. I barely had time to breathe. My business had transformed from a struggling side project into a full-fledged operation. Orders were pouring in faster than I could handle. Custom parts for hospital equipment, emergency supplies for factories, even specialized prototypes for research labs, all needed immediately, all willing to pay top dollar. I reinvested every cent. New printers, new materials, rented warehouse space to keep up with production. My assistant, once just a college kid helping part-time, became a crucial part of the operation. I hired more help, technicians who knew the machines, engineers who could refine my designs. One night, after finishing an exhausting batch of orders, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. It hit me then, I had done it. Jessica had walked away, convinced I was nothing, that I would fail. And yet, here I was, running a company that was thriving in a collapsing world. I used to dream about proving her wrong. Now, I didn't care. I had built something that was mine, something real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need her to see it. My company was no longer a struggling startup. It was a force. Orders flooded in daily, customized parts for hospitals, industrial machinery, even aerospace components. My name was being passed around by executives and engineers alike. I had expanded beyond the garage. The new facility had 10 printers running at all times, a full team handling logistics, and a waiting list of clients eager for my work. I was no longer just making ends meet. I was thriving. Then, one day, an unexpected message appeared on my phone. It was Jessica. "Hey, Tom. It's been a while. I heard about your company. Wow. I guess you really did make it. Would love to catch up sometime." I stared at the message, a mixture of emotions swirling inside me. The woman who had doubted me, who had walked out when things were hard, now wanted to catch up. I set the phone down without replying. I didn't need to prove anything to her anymore. Success was its own response. I never looked Jessica up after she left. I had no reason to. She had chosen her path, and I had fought my way to success without her. But fate had a funny way of bringing things full circle. One evening, after finalizing a deal with a major manufacturer, I ran into an old mutual acquaintance. Mark, a guy Jessica and I used to hang out with. He greeted me with a smirk and a pat on the back. "Man, you won't believe what happened to that guy Jessica left you for," he said, sipping his beer. "Total disaster." I raised an eyebrow, more out of curiosity than anything else. "Oh, yeah, that bar owner? Turns out he was terrible with money. Got hit hard when the flu shutdowns wrecked the hospitality business. Debt piled up. Lost the bar. Had to sell his house. Last I heard, he's working as a bartender in some dive, barely scraping by." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, letting the words settle in. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, more like closure. The world had a way of balancing things out, whether I was involved or not. Mark chuckled. "And Jessica? Well, she bet on the wrong horse. Left him when things got tough, just like she left you." I finished my drink, set the glass down, and smiled. Sound about right. I walked away that night with a quiet certainty. Jessica had once thought I wasn't worth sticking around for. Turns out, she was the one who couldn't keep up. I never looked Jessica up after she left. I had no reason to. She had chosen her path, and I had fought my way to success without her. But fate had a funny way of bringing things full circle. One evening, after finalizing a deal with a major manufacturer, I ran into an old mutual acquaintance, Mark, a guy Jessica and I used to hang out with. He greeted me with a smirk and a pat on the back. "Man, you won't believe what happened to that guy Jessica left you for," he said, sipping his beer. "Total disaster." I raised an eyebrow, more out of curiosity than anything else. "Oh, yeah, that bar owner? Turns out he was terrible with money. Got hit hard when the flu shutdowns wrecked the hospitality business. Debt piled up. Lost the bar. Had to sell his house. Last I heard, he's working as a bartender in some dive, barely scraping by." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, letting the words settle in. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, more like closure. The world had a way of balancing things out, whether I was involved or not. Mark chuckled. "And Jessica? Well, she bet on the wrong horse. Left him when things got tough, just like she left you." I finished my drink, set the glass down, and smiled. Sound about right. I walked away that night with a quiet certainty. Jessica had once thought I wasn't worth sticking around for. Turns out, she was the one who couldn't keep up. I never expected to hear from Jessica again, but life had a way of throwing surprises my way. One evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the latest expansion plans for my company, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hey, Tom. It's Jessica. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even curious. But a part of me, maybe the part that once loved her, wanted to see what she had to say. A few days later, she showed up outside my office. She looked different. The confidence she once carried, the sharp edge in her voice, it was gone. Her clothes were nice, but not flashy, and there were lines on her face that hadn't been there before. Life had caught up to her. "Tom," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. "Sorry for what exactly?" She let out a shaky breath. "For everything. For doubting you. For leaving you. For not believing in what you were building. I thought I was making the smart choice, but I see now that I made the biggest mistake of my life." I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. "I lost everything, Tom," she continued. "After things fell apart with him, I tried to start over, but nothing worked out. I thought I was trading up, but I ended up losing it all. And now, I just want to say that I see it. I see what you were trying to do, and I respect you for it." I studied her, searching for the manipulation, the angle, but all I saw was regret. Genuine, painful regret. "Jessica," I said finally, "I spent so long wanting you to see my worth. To prove to you that I wasn't some failure wasting time on a dream. But the thing is, I don't need that anymore. I know my worth, and it has nothing to do with you." Her eyes shimmered, and she nodded, as if she had expected that response. "I understand. I needed to tell you." She stood up to leave, but before she walked out, she turned back one last time. "I hope you're happy, Tom." "Truly," I smiled, not out of bitterness, but because for the first time in my life, I really was. "I am." And with that, Jessica walked out of my life for good. As the door closed behind her, I turned back to my work. The past was exactly where it needed to be, behind me. I had a future to build, and for the first time, I was completely free to do it. Jessica may have walked out of my office that day, but she wasn't done. A few weeks later, another message popped up on my phone. Tom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me again, but I was wondering if we could meet. Just one last time. Please. I considered ignoring it. I'd already given her closure, already let her say her piece. But something in me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a desire to hear her out one last time, led me to reply. Fine. One last time. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place we used to go to when we were struggling together. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table near the window, stirring her coffee absently. When she looked up and saw me, a small, hopeful smile crossed her lips. Tom, she said, standing as if she wanted to hug me, but she must have seen the hesitation in my stance because she sat back down. I took the seat across from her, folding my hands on the table. What is it, Jessica? She took a deep breath. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know I burned every bridge, but I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything. And I miss you. I exhaled slowly, watching her carefully. You miss me, or you miss what I have now. Her face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked, tilting my head. When I was struggling, you left. When I was trying to build something, you laughed at me. Now that I'm successful, now that I don't need you, suddenly you want to come back. She reached across the table, her fingers barely grazing my hand before I pulled away. I was wrong, Tom. I was selfish, and I let fear guide my choices. But I see it now. What you built, who you've become, it's everything I ever wanted. And I know it's too much to ask, but she swallowed hard. Could we ever have another chance? I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. Jessica, you don't love me. You love the idea of what I've become. But the man sitting in front of you, the man I am now, he doesn't love you anymore. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. But then she nodded, pressing her lips together. I understand. I stood up, dropping a few bills on the table. Take care of yourself, Jessica. I hope you find what you're looking for. She didn't stop me as I walked away. This time, I was the one leaving, and it felt damn good. Walking away from Jessica felt like closing the final chapter of a book I should have put down long ago. The past had a way of creeping back, but this time I had no interest in reopening old wounds. I had moved on, and it was time she did too. A few days later, I received another message from her. Tom, I don't know how to let go. Please, can we talk? I need to understand. I deleted the message without responding. That silence was my final answer. Jessica didn't reach out again after that. Not directly, at least. But word travels. Friends, acquaintances, even business connections started mentioning that she was asking about me. Some said she regretted everything. Others said she was struggling to find stability, hopping between jobs, trying to hold onto a lifestyle that had slipped through her fingers. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for her. But that feeling passed quickly. I had spent years feeling inadequate, wondering if I was good enough. Jessica had made me doubt myself, had walked away when I needed support the most. Now, here I was, stronger, successful, and free. I owed her nothing. One evening, I sat in my office, looking over projections for my company's continued expansion. My assistant knocked, poking her head in. Hey, Tom, there's a woman here asking to see you. Says her name is Jessica. I didn't even hesitate. Tell her I'm not available. A flicker of surprise crossed my assistant's face, but she nodded and left. A few minutes later, I heard the quiet sound of footsteps leaving the building. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just peace. I had given Jessica her chance to say her piece. I had heard her out, and I had chosen to move forward without her. Some things weren't meant to be rekindled. Some doors were meant to stay closed. And this one was locked for good. I thought I had seen the last of Jessica. I had given her closure, walked away, and refused to let her back into my life. But some people don't take silence as an answer. Some people, when they realize they can't get what they want emotionally, try to take it by force. The lawsuit arrived at my office on a Monday morning. I skimmed the papers, my stomach twisting. Jessica was suing me for a share of my business. Her claim? That because we were married during the time I was building it, she was entitled to a portion of my success. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after she left me, after she drained our savings, after she doubted and mocked me, she had the audacity to demand a piece of what I had built alone. Anger surged through me, but I took a deep breath. This wasn't a battle I could fight with emotions. I needed strategy. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca, and laid it all out for her. She has no case, Rebecca said, flipping through the documents when we met. She left before your company was even profitable. She abandoned the marriage voluntarily and took money from your joint account when she did. This is a desperate attempt to cash in. Then let's shut it down, I said firmly. And so, the legal fight began. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue that she had been my support system during the early days, that without her, I never would have had the time or ability to focus on my company. We countered with bank statements, showing the money she took when she left. We presented records of my struggle, my unpaid bills, my near eviction after she walked out. I had been alone, and I had survived alone. The more evidence we laid out, the weaker her case became. But Jessica wasn't just looking for money. She was looking for revenge, for some kind of validation that she still had power over me. She wasn't going to get it. As I left the courtroom after one of the hearings, I passed her in the hallway. She looked different from the woman I had once known, tired, desperate, clinging to something she no longer had a right to. "Why are you doing this, Jessica?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Because you owe me." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "I owe you nothing. You made your choice. Now, live with it." She didn't have a response to that. I walked away, my head held high, ready to win this battle, just like I had won every other one she thought would break me. The trial didn't last long. Jessica's case was weak, built on desperation rather than substance. My legal team tore through her claims with cold, hard facts. The records of my financial struggles after she left, the proof that she had taken our savings, and the undeniable truth that I had built my company from nothing, alone, all of it stacked against her. Jessica sat across the courtroom, her lawyers scrambling to salvage what little argument they had left. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Ms. Reynolds," the judge said, his voice measured and firm, "your claim lacks merit. You forfeited any right to Mr. Carter's business when you voluntarily left the marriage, withdrew shared assets, and did not contribute to his company's development or success. This court sees no reason to award you any portion of his earnings." Case dismissed. It was over. Just like that. Jessica sat frozen, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something, but she barely reacted. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly speechless. Meanwhile, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I had known we would win, but hearing the final judgment spoken aloud felt like the last chain breaking free. Rebecca shook my hand as we walked out of the courtroom. "Told you she didn't have a case. Now you can move on for good." I nodded, glancing back once. Jessica was still sitting there, staring at the table, as if willing time to reverse itself. But time only moved forward, and so did I. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. It felt like a fresh start. No more ghosts of the past trying to drag me down. No more unfinished business. I had won, not just in court but in life. Jessica had once told me my dreams would never amount to anything, that I was wasting my time. Now, the only thing wasted was her attempt to take what wasn't hers. And I had never felt more free. The courtroom defeat wasn't just a legal loss for Jessica. It was the start of her complete unraveling. Word spread quickly. Our old friends, former co-workers, even acquaintances from years back. Everyone knew what had happened. Jessica had tried to take what wasn't hers and failed spectacularly. She must have thought she still had options, still had a way to climb back up. But the reality was much harsher. Her debts had piled up, the failed lawsuit only adding to her financial troubles. Without the payout she had been banking on, she was stuck. I later heard that she had tried reaching out to old friends, looking for a place to stay, but most had distanced themselves. No one wanted to help someone who had burned every bridge. I didn't go looking for updates, but life had a way of making sure I found out. An old mutual friend, Kevin, ran into me one afternoon at a business conference. He chuckled when he brought her up. Man, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. Jessica's been bouncing between jobs, but nothing sticks. She tried working at some high-end boutique, got fired. Then she tried waiting tables, but that didn't last either. Apparently, she still expects life to cater to her. I shook my head, but I wasn't surprised. Jessica had always looked for shortcuts. She wanted luxury without effort, success without struggle. Kevin leaned in, lowering his voice. Last I heard, she was staying in some tiny apartment on the other side of town, barely making rent. She's not the same woman you knew. Well, let's just say life humbled her. I didn't feel joy at her downfall. There was no satisfaction in knowing she had hit rock bottom. If anything, I felt indifferent. Jessica had made her choices. She had believed she could walk away from me and land somewhere better. But life didn't reward selfishness. And now, she was learning that the hard way. As Kevin finished his story, I simply nodded. I hope she figures things out. But that's not my problem anymore. And it never would be again. Jessica had always believed she was destined for something better. She thought she could walk away from me, from the life we built, and find something easier, something grander. But life had shown her otherwise. The last real update I got about her came from an old friend, Melissa. We weren't close, but she had always been in the same social circles as Jessica, and she still kept tabs on people. "You're not going to believe this," she said when we ran into each other at a corporate event. "Jessica's working at one of those chain restaurants now. You know, the kind where they make the waitstaff sing for birthdays." I blinked, not expecting that. "You're serious?" Melissa nodded, smirking. "Dead serious. She's waiting tables, barely making ends meet. Apparently, she tried to date another successful guy, but when he found out about the lawsuit and her debt, he ran for the hills." I exhaled, shaking my head. It was almost poetic. Jessica had once mocked me for struggling, for believing in something bigger when all I had were ideas and a garage. Now, she was the one scraping by, while I was sitting in meetings with executives and planning expansions. Melissa looked at me carefully. "Does it make you happy, seeing her like that?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "No, I don't feel anything. She's just someone I used to know." And that was the truth. Jessica had once been my world, the person I thought I would spend my life with. But that person was gone, replaced by a memory, a cautionary tale of what happens when you bet against the wrong person. As I left the event that night, I felt lighter. Jessica had been chasing a future that didn't exist while I had built mine from the ground up. And now, she was nothing more than a lesson, one I had already learned. The past had finally settled where it belonged, behind me. Jessica was no longer a lingering shadow in my life, no longer a weight I carried. I had one, not just in court, not just in business, but in the most important way possible. I had moved on. My company continued to grow, expanding into industries I had never imagined when I first started. The small workshop in my garage had turned into a full-scale production facility, employing dozens of people and filling orders worldwide. What had once been a desperate attempt to make ends meet had become an empire. But beyond the success, beyond the numbers and deals, was something even more valuable: peace. I woke up each morning without resentment, without bitterness. I had a future of my own making, one that no longer had anything to do with Jessica or the pain she had left behind. One evening, as I walked through my facility, watching my team work on the latest projects, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: pure, unshakable contentment. I had built this. Every moment of struggle, every setback, every doubt had led me here. And I wouldn't change a thing. I no longer needed validation. I didn't need to prove anything to Jessica or to anyone else. The best revenge wasn't winning. It was thriving. And I was thriving. As I locked up for the night, I took one last look at the place that had once been nothing but a dream. Then, with a satisfied breath, I walked forward toward the life I had built and the endless possibilities ahead.